Hello, this is your final quiz review and prep mini lecture. I'm also going to talk about quiz 10 quickly here as well and get you lined up to take that. I sort of have it looks sort of odd in that we have a bunch of points gobbed into this last part right here. It's sort of by design in terms of with us doing an online course, we normally have more of what in the syllabus are described as those sort of participation points where you have a chance to work in groups and that type of thing if we were meeting in person. And we don't really have that. So, as far as this is just a chance, the same thing that you'd have ideas and concepts, you'd be able to bounce off each other, and things might come up a little more often just in the normal course of natural conversation about what we're reading and writing and what we're up to in a semester. So since we don't have that, what I'm doing is trying to just get these little quizzes, hopefully have a little bit of fun with them, and allow you to one from the grade point or grade perspective, pick up those points, and then also just reemphasize some of these concepts that I think are pretty crucial and essential overall to take with you beyond this class and something that might be useful in other classes and other writing down the road. So the first thing I'll do is quiz 10. That's in this module for week 15. And quiz 10 has one question, so don't be looking for a whole bunch. One question, and it's basically has to do with just getting us and just kind of just kind of throwing an easy one up there for you to pick up some of those points you would have picked up over the course of the semester and the workshops. And so that question is, when writing your poem for assignment 7, a poem in response to music, doing what might be a good way to begin your writing? I talked about this in just the lecture before. And I mentioned the answer would be free write into a journal or onto a blank page, get a bunch of words down, even if you cut a lot of those to start with, right? Because we don't have we don't have some of the visual cues, some of the things when we're responding to things like artwork. So that it can be a little tough sometimes because it's the music that's also in your head and your rhythm. So you got to get it down onto the page, those words, so you can sculpt and work with them. This is one of the strategies we talked about before for other things, as far as that, keeping notes for journals and whatnot, and translating the words in your head onto the page, right? It's different strategies to get the thoughts, the concepts onto the page where you can work with them and shape them. So that's all that is to question 10. So you can after you can knock that thing off real quick there. And then I'm going to go into the 10 questions that comprise the final quiz, this final quiz, final exam of sorts. I hate to say final exam because that gets folks nervous. But this should be pretty easy and fun here. So I'm just going to roll through what the 10 questions are and give you the answers, talk about them a little bit as I do. So again, this is replacing the sort of conversation you'd have by being in a weekly classroom. And it gives us a chance to rethink those tools. So I'll start with question 1 is going to be, the writing strategy of favoring showing versus telling emphasizes what? So I've been talking about, so oftentimes in writing, better to show the details than to tell the reader. And so the answer would be using more active. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll get to the right line here. The answer for showing versus telling would be giving your reader the details of a scene so they can reach your conclusions, as opposed to summing up for them with large abstractions and concepts. I always think of it from the perspective, no one likes to be told what to do, right? We'd rather see the details and particulars and come to the conclusion ourselves. So what we're thinking about a scene, oftentimes if we have, we can either say something like the man was upset and frustrated. That's telling, right? So that'd be telling. Doesn't really reveal much. But if we have the man stared down at the quiz, took his glasses off, squinted his eyes, rubbed his head, stepped back a minute, and then walked out the door. We get the idea of that. It's got confusion and all that kind of stuff with the details, and we can really feel that more profoundly than just that sort of summary being told what to do. So, I mean, of course, you don't want to go on and on. There's that sort of notion of balance that we're always working with, but there's the sort of idea, that's the concept of showing those details and letting the reader reach those conclusions. Let's see. The second thing is verb selection. Right? Why is it important to use engaging and interesting verbs? I've been talking about that throughout the semester. And the main thing here is using more active or engaging verbs highlights your details. Right, so you might have a lot of terrific details. It's the verbs that bring them to life. It makes it clear who is doing what. That's part of that notion of when we write using the is, was, were, all those forms of be, or what's called in grammatical terms using the passive voice. The subject usually in those constructions aren't doing anything. So if we use a more active voice verb, or a more engaging, just interesting verb than was, is, are, those type of things, then oftentimes we'll make our details work out better, clear up who's doing what, and it can avoid some of the grammatical problems too. Sometimes when you get in those, if you're using a lot of is, are, the forms of be, those type of verbs, you can get into some tangled sentence structures too that sort of talk around an issue instead of landing on it. So an active, engaging verb will solve some grammatical problems for you too. So I think that is it's one of the key tricks as far as translating what's in your mind and getting it directly onto the page where it's more effective. Look at those verbs. Get everything down on the page. Work with it, shaping it. But when you're shaping it, if you have a lot of verbs that aren't doing much, start making them do something, and you'll probably untangle some of the sentences, be able to break sentences up, do some other things. The verbs are key to that. Titles. Next question is going to be, the title of a piece of writing should do what? And the answer is capture the reader's attention and provide a brief way from which to consider the writing that follows. Right. It's part of the hook when we talked about that area. That was the title and the opening sentences when we were talking about fiction that draw people in. Right. So the next question is very similar. What is just one of the things an opening sentence or line? Well, it's a sentence if it's story or nonfiction. It's a line of poetry if it's poems. So what is one thing an opening sentence or line might do? And I put the answer is hook the reader's interest. Right. We talked about that a little bit. We had an essay on that, and just it's something to get their attention. Also, it's if you think about, I know that some folks are wanting to continue to write, and we're talking about sending things off to publishers and editors, that type of thing, and of course they receive all sorts of writing materials. So that initial title, that for those first couple of lines, if they have 50 things to read, if the first couple of sentences don't hook their attention, they're moving on to the next thing, right? So you have to be able to hook an editor or a publisher just to get things rolling, right? Just to get your writing out into the world. So that's one of the things that an opening line or sentence might do. What is one strategy for closing a story? So if we start at the beginning, we come to the end. What is one strategy for closing a story or a poem? I mentioned that closing with a distinct or vivid image. Right? So that was one of the things when we were talking about fiction. Right? It's tempting to want to summarize. This also ties into that idea of showing versus telling. It's tempting to want to summarize everything and really making sure that the reader gets our point of view or our meaning or what we were up to in the story or what we were up to in the poem. And it's tempting, but it's not nearly as effective as we imagine it to be. I don't know if this is just a hangover from the 5-paragraph essay we're taught as kids, but I'm not sure why that thing appears so pervasively. But it's not that effective of a strategy. One of the things that people were doing actually very well in here throughout the semester was being confident that the reader has gotten what you're up to. They understand what you're doing, and hopefully really enjoyed the poem or the story or whatever you've been writing. And then being able to end with a closing image or a distinctive image, I think, is oftentimes much more effective. You can imagine sort of the idea, instead of if you have something where someone's finally getting the courage to leave a situation, right? So you can have the specific image you're closing with is, and he turned the ignition key, and the engine fired up, right? And click the gear into drive or something like that. That shows that person's taken off. They're gone. They finally got their momentum and they're leaving, as opposed to having some sort of summary of what's going on in their mind. You can let the actions show it. The next question is going to be on Larry Levis. He was the one that had the poem "The Wound" that starts with "I've loved you as a man loves an old wound, picked up in a razor fight," and the question is, Larry Levis in his poem "The Wound" took the common phrase "I love you" and does what with it? And the answer is he expands it over about a dozen lines into a unique poem that's all his own. So he takes a common piece of language and he expands it into a really sharp, wonderful scene he's just working from such a common phrase. And I just mentioned that because one of the things that on some of the comments that I was giving folks on their writing was that you can always, if you have a common piece of language, the temptation sometimes is to just cut it. Say, oh, it's cliche. It's it's not my voice. It's a common piece of language. I'm just going to cut it. Sometimes you can expand that, or you can twist it, or you can turn it, and just make these little modifications that can make it all yours. So it connects with the reader, and that because it is common piece of language or cliche piece of language, we're used to hearing it, so we can connect. So there is a little bit of an advantage there, but you don't want to just leave it as that, because then it's someone else's words or someone else's phrase, right? So, but if you twist it and turn it, make it unique, you've made both the connection with the reader, and you also still have your own voice working as well. So it's just something to keep in mind, because I know perhaps in other writing workshops you've heard if there's something cliche or a common piece of language, the feedback will be, oh, cut that, or just get rid of that, it's not working, that type of thing. But sometimes it's a placeholder for something else that you're getting after. So I wouldn't just leave those common pieces of language or those cliches. Don't just leave those things in there. But you might want to work with them. And I think Larry Levis was probably just a pretty good example for us about midway through the semester. And so moving on from Larry Levis, Sue Williams Silverman essay. That was one of the essays that we used to make the transition from fiction to creative nonfiction. And she starts that essay with the notion of the I, the first person singular. And the question is, Sue Williams Silverman writes what of the I in creative nonfiction? The answer is it is a literary device used to enhance or explore complicated truths. So Sue Williams Silverman writes what of the I in creative nonfiction? She writes that it's a literary device used to enhance or explore complicated truths. And that was we were getting after that notion, if you recall, that the first person, when I say I in a piece of writing or creative nonfiction, which we assume is true, or is supposed to be literally true, that just saying I, it's not just me. There's a certain persona or character that you're creating, even in nonfiction, when you use the first person and you use the I. And she mentions that in that essay. I think that's important for us to assume. And it's not that we're being untruthful. I think it's just that there's a certain way that we speak or conduct ourselves when we're with family members. If you're going to visit your mom, you might talk about different things in different ways than if you're going to hang out with your friends, or if you're going to hang out with your colleagues at work, right? So the I and who we are isn't always the same. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as writers, that we also create that, or create a certain persona, even in nonfiction, even when we're being truthful to literally what happened in an event. The I, or the first person, isn't just a given. And I think that Sue Williams Silverman essay was great for demonstrating that. Next question: what does it mean to fiddle with a line of poetry? And on almost everyone here, I've put comments along the lines of, I'm not sure about this line or this sentence. Maybe I'd fiddle with it a little bit. I'd expand. I'd maybe cut things out, maybe move things around. So I just want to make sure people understood what I meant with fiddling with a line of poetry, or with a piece of short fiction, or a sentence or two in short fiction. So the answer there is to edit or revise by taking a phrase or specific area and scribbling in all sorts of variations or possibilities with no particular objectives. Sometimes you get to an area and it's not quite working. You see, you have something in there you've written, just a placeholder. You like the intent, but you can tell it's just not quite working. So those are the times where I start kind of writing off in the margins, or either kind of typing and kind of reconsidering and deleting and adding and that kind of stuff. Just fiddle with no particular objective. And I kind of think of fiddling, if you think of that word, of course, the connotation to be a musician fiddling around. Hey, just play some notes, right? Just kind of jamming a little bit. Just jam a little bit, see what happens in there. And I think that's one of the things, going back to the idea, we have all these ideas in our head, and we want to translate them onto the page, get them on the page where we can work with them. And fiddling's part of that. You get it down there, you like a certain area, it's one of these revision techniques. You want to keep kind of messing with it. and see what happens. And of course, you can always just return back to the original, whatever was originally there. Maybe you fiddled with it for 10, 15, 20 minutes and wrote 5 or 6 different sentences that none of it was quite as good as what was there. Maybe that's it. Or maybe you'll run across something as well. We mentioned I don't have this as a quiz question just because I was going to add this as the 11th question, but then it's sort of throw off the logic of my point scheme that I was getting up to. But surprise, over and over again, we've ran across different writers and essays that talk about how important it is to surprise ourselves as writers. And oftentimes that'll be what most connects with our readers. And so that fiddling also is in that same tradition, so that you can fiddle with an area, see what happens, surprise yourself with what happens, and oftentimes that'll be the most powerful part of your writing. So 2 more questions to go. Who is the most recent winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature? American poet Louise Glick. We talked about Louise Glick a little bit. That happened just this semester. I think that's pretty terrific. I've always admired her poetry, and I think it's fun to have an American poet win the Nobel Prize for Literature this year. It's been a few years since that's happened. Another question along those lines of what's happening now in the world of writing. Who is the current United States Poet Laureate? And the U.S. Poet Laureate is Joy Harjo. So I also wanted to mention her again, because those are certainly some folks, if you wanted to continue to do some reading, checking some things out after the end of the semester. There's a lot of interesting writers doing fantastic things right now. So that is our review and for our final quiz. And now go take that quiz, get those points. I put some goofy other alternatives to those answers. I tried to make them as goofy as possible so you wouldn't possibly click them and lose those points. Don't click things that seem goofy, even if it's kind of funny or something like that. But these are easy points. You've earned them. You've stuck with the class during a tough time, and so get these points, and this would basically take care of what would be your participation portion in a workshop if we were meeting in person. So get these points. Keep working on the rest of your writing, and good luck. Thanks.